Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us, especially Michael and Mark and Ruth. And of course, we need to say now Lou, now that he's left the studio. We meet right now on Thursdays to have internal conversations within the studio about different aspects of the studio's practice, just so that we can go a little more in depth. And during this quarter, we wanted to begin to think about the aspect of bending the river back into the city that has to do with the idea of forming a utility. So I thought it would be a really good idea for the studio practice to understand what a utility is from the perspective of like water, and how Army Corps fits in to the management of water for the city of LA, and specifically about the management of the LA River that is the subject of bending the river back into the city. So just to start off with, I was wondering if of, Michael and Mark in particular, from a perspective of your advocacy work and your engineering work, how would you say in general people in sort of government agencies
Hmm.
think of the word utility? What does it mean for them?
I think for most people, it means the provision of essential services like energy or power, water, sewer treatment, things like that.
Yeah, and I would, getting a little bit more into Lauren's question, I might be taking it too far. The question was kind of also related to how do people that are actually working for the government see their role as a utility. And it's interesting because it's public service, right? You're working for the public good. Many folks, treat their job as a job. But there are also folks within those agencies and entities that really care passionately about what they do and take a strong stance for the hat that they're wearing, and really care about the fact that every time you turn on the tap, water comes out, for instance. The water system in the city of Los Angeles actually brags about that a little bit, because although the power system yields, generates so much more revenue than the water system, there are times when you turn on the light switch and the lights don't go on, but the water continues to flow.
Yeah.
And then Army Corps, of course, manages vast amounts of water during very brief moments. And maybe Ruth, as a former Army Corps employee and a current person who works closely with them, if you have any other insights on that.
No, I think you're right, Mark, that they take it very passionately for the most part. Certainly the ones that are in and most of the leadership roles do within the Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And they see it as their sole job pretty much in life is to protect the public and property to the level that has been approved and built by Congress funding them to do so. And then they've turned facilities over to the non-federal sponsor, which in this case would be LA County Public Works Department of Public Works, or the Flood Control District. They wear the same hats, but I think they do take that seriously, and their job is to ensure that nothing that anybody does to modify that in any way affects the functioning and usefulness of performing the job for which it was constructed.
You know, that's an important distinction that both of you have pointed out. LA historically, we had a privatized utility system until the late 1800s. And then Los Angeles led the national movement for the public ownership of water and power facilities. They succeeded, of course, 100% on the water side. On the power side, if I'm not mistaken, we still receive natural gas in Los Angeles from a private utility.
And
But on the water side, public ownership was a big deal, and a lot of folks fought hard in the late 1800s to wrest it from the control of private company.
And was that about maximum distribution for people so that it could be affordable and regularized?
Well, and not just that, but one of the big complaints about the private system was that it was interested in maximizing profits and not investing in the infrastructure that was necessary to have lines distributed throughout the city that were reliable. So the feeling was, if it was publicly owned, the city as the owner could issue bonds to pay for the necessary infrastructure improvements while also not gouging the public because it had no interest in profits per se.
Right.
So maybe, so are we looking at, how old is Army Corps itself as a federal agency?
The Army Corps of Engineers was formed in 1775, so the year
Whoa.
before the country actually. And they were brought in to build roadways, bridges, whatever they needed to for the start of the Civil War, you know.
Or the Revolutionary
Civil
War.
but the Revolutionary
Yeah.
War. Just been watching Grant series, so I'm in the Civil War now. Yeah, but even predated that by a year. So
How does the Army Corps fit into the federal government's management? Like, is it its own department, or is it under a certain department?
it's under the Department of Defense. And so the president is not only the president over all federal agencies, but he's also the commander in chief for the Army and the Army Corps of Engineers, which is under that branch. And so there are there are 8 divisions. They divide them into major watersheds across the country. And then we're in the Colorado or South Pacific Division, Colorado River and basically west of there. And then there are 27 different districts, and LA district is the one that we're in, and they take from the lower Colorado watershed, which is basically the Tehachapi's south of there, so San Luis Obispo and south, and then all the way through Southern California, all of Arizona, little corner of Utah at St. George area, and then a third of Nevada, which includes all of Clark County, you know, Las Vegas, etc. So it's 226,000 miles of, acres of, or square miles of area that they control. And it's headquartered in Los Angeles. And so that's why you're working with the LA district, but so does everybody in Arizona and a third of the Nevada folks and a little bit of Utah. So there you go.
Thank you, Anessa. So this is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and my understanding is that we're in that kind of rosy colored area,
Yeah.
but we're adjacent to the Sacramento. Um,
Yes. Sacramento, San Francisco, Albuquerque, and LA, all of those pinkish kind of areas all represent the regional office, which is the South Pacific Division, headquartered in San Francisco.
okay, but since a lot of the waters at least move between those two zones, are they kind of closely connected?
Yes, yes. All of them are at that divisional level. A lot of the like the different discipline chiefs talk back and forth between each of the districts within a division. So the 4 districts in South Pacific Division interact pretty frequently. We even swapped all of our feasibility studies, like the ecosystem restoration feasibility study and EIR EIS for restoration of the LA River, was traded off to another district to review it prior to it going to the public. And so that was a separate independent set of peer review prior to even letting it go outside of the district area to the division office. And that,
Okay, so Ruth, when we submit an application like the 408, does it go first to our division, our division, to the Colorado River and West Division, or does it go into a whole, 408 is the same no matter what of the 27 divisions you're a part of? Does it go to the central?
no, it actually goes directly to the district that you're going to work in. We've done 408s in the recent past as well in San Francisco district. And I must say they're a little faster, a lot faster than LA district in doing theirs, but they don't have very many of them because the San Francisco district area is pretty well built out, and there are not too many of their features that change.
Yeah.
One we did was in uh, Richmond area outside of San Francisco, and it was a development that had to encroach upon a levee in Wildcat Creek, to do a development adjacent to it. It's not as much as like the LA Basin and even Arizona that are really growing in many of their areas and replacing bridges and other things as well.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, I've got people are picking up the garbage outside, so I apologize for the screeching trucks. I think they're leaving. But I'm hoping, I'd really love to be able to make sure that I do whatever I can to help our whole team understand what the 408 is and is not, because the 408 has been like this, like looming thing for such a large part of the studio practice. And just to kind of get everybody on the same page, a year ago, we received the 408 permit, and Lou, you'll probably remember exactly when we received the 408, but the 408 was what allowed us to begin our experience in the LA River. And we immediately celebrated with a square dance. And I think that that was a time that almost everybody on the screen, or our guests, were together because we all recognized the importance and the importance to celebrate. And I wonder whether Michael and Mark and Ruth can comment on how unusual it is and how hard it was. I remember, for example, Michael saying that he literally had to like walk that paperwork from office to office. So I wondered if you can talk a bit about the unusualness of getting the 408 last summer.
Just for everybody's reference, the 408 came on September 9th of last year.
Wow. California statehood anniversary.
Oh, wow. And
Ruth,
And
Ruth and Mark did Ruth and Mark did a lot of the heavy lifting on the 408, and they can describe the details of that process far better than I.
yeah, thank you. Would you guys do us the honors of telling the rest of the team what was involved with that? First of all, when we first applied for the 408 and how long it took to get to the point where we received it on September 9th.
Ruth, I'll start just a brief history, but you definitely put on the backpack with all the pieces and carried it in. So I'll hand that part over to you. But the original permit application started in 2012. Our first file was dated, I think it was September or October of 2012. And so our permit number that we use to track all of our files, including hydraulic analyses and structural and geotechnical, you know, the stability of the earth underneath the channel, all had a 2012 date until I guess it was in 2018 when we made the major change, Lauren, with moving from the rubber dam to the pipeline. And we accelerated with the new design, got David Van Dorp online, and Ruth then joined the foray, or she'd been involved, but really came in, you know, with her engines roaring, and helped us provide some of the technical analyses, but also developed quite a few of them herself and carried it through. So Ruth, when we changed the permit application from a 2012 to a 2018?
Yes, it was October 2018. You all will remember that meeting with the Corps so well, I'm sure, where we were told in no uncertain terms they wouldn't allow the rubber dam. So you had to change the design.
Yes.
You had already been starting on that. So that design actually got changed around pretty quickly, and we submitted in, I believe it was the end of January or the first week or so of February with the new plan. So for the Corps to turn it around that quickly and within 8 months or so to get us a full 408 permit, that was like unheard of for LA District for a big job like this. And what it involved was all the technical reviews, and they all do their own thing on their own time. So we would set up meetings to address comments from the structural engineer, and we get the structural team on that, and then the geotech team. And then, so we took it in bits and bytes as they came, as we received comments from them, because it's not like a city gives you a consolidated set of comments of all the departments in their review. This was, everybody was doing their own thing, and then we tried to have a couple of other meetings. I went back and forth with the Corps a lot, just keeping them informed of all the other changes. In the meantime, we did a third addendum to the initial study for the city to use as their CEQA document. And we did an environmental assessment for the Corps for their use in both the 404 and 408 permitting process. Both of those need an environmental assessment. So we had all the permits, the 401, water quality, permit with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the 404 permit for disposal of dredged and fill material, and the 1600 with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, all teed up and all submitted at about the same time that we submitted the 408 permit. The 404 is actually required for that. So with the environmental documents going, we got the agencies to review the permits working on us while we were finalizing the CEQA documents. Now the regional board is sending back anything that doesn't have a finalized CEQA document with a notice of determination on it. So that was kind of a first. This one was also the first time when it was issued in September last year, where it was a combined letter saying you have your 408 and 404. The way it had worked in the past is a 408 permit would be issued, and weeks or a month or so later, you would get a 404 permit issued, and you couldn't do any construction or any modifications at all in the channel till you had both of those. So this time was the first time which their regulations require them to do, where they really did issue a joint letter, even though it's two separate permits under the same joint letter. Kind of interesting though.
Thank you. So helpful. And in terms of your own personal career, when were you, when we began this project in 2012, working at the district office for Army Corps, or have you entered this narrative of R408 from an ex-Army Corps internal perspective and being a consultant?
I entered this one as a consultant. I went out in May of 2008.
Okay.
I left my position as chief of planning division at the LA District Corps in 2008 and worked for another engineering consultant firm, and then decided their mantra was, how much more can you eke out of clients? Not were the clients satisfied or is your team well trained, et cetera. So I decided I'm going out on my own. I could do better than this. So I stepped out on my own in August of 2012.
What was fun about the process is Ruth's the reception Ruth receives when we walk into the federal building there. All of us need to sign in and hand over IDs and go through the metal detector. And she just has, she's greeted with these open arms and, oh, don't worry about it. Come on by. And it's neat to see, Ruth, that you still have such a strong relationship with the folks over there.
Well, even walking out of the Corps, I've always worked for them in one way or another, either as, like in this case, paid by an applicant, or working for Orange County Water District as a consultant to them to help on different projects and many others. So, and I think those relationships that you spend a lifetime building are really key to working with any agency. And if they know you and they trust you and you keep showing up a lot, you go to the things that are important to them and you show up for their annual picnic and other things, even when you're not there, that does make a difference. And at least it gave us entree and we could push. I tell them I'm their favorite stalker. So, because I was up there every week, every other week, depending on what the project needed for us to try to push these through.
Thank you, Ruth. You've given us so much help and support. Anessa, that graphic that you just took down, would you mind putting it up one more time? Is that the new, I think these helped put together some of the mind map that Jaime, Lou, and I had worked on at an earlier iteration. And I just wondered, can you walk through this graphic for the studio team?
Sure, yeah. Bees took information and built this lovely condensed version of the permitting process. And just to remind everybody, this is just the river, not the entire project, which is a big part of it. And all of the different agencies and even government groups that have a role to play on the approval process. And we did this a little quick a couple days ago. This was a pass. There might be even more embedded that we didn't even capture for the river, but you do have the four main permits in the river are the 408, and that's the big daddy of them all, and then under that is the 404 that are both under the core, and then to support that you have the NEPA and CEQA documents that are both federal and state. And then now there is a cultural resource aspect of that is in line with the environmental process. And then when we move forward in this conversation, we can talk more about the importance of SHPO now, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, and what that means to us now, and the changes we've made to our application, as well as the 1602 by the Fish and Wildlife, and the 401 is the last main permit with the Regional Water Quality Board, all predicated with Michael's work on obtaining the water right. And since we are adjacent to and will be going under the rail, we'll be working with permitting through the MTA, and also ultimately the underwriting owner of everything is still the city of LA, even though all these other agencies control, especially the Army Corps with the liner has control over this. We still ultimately need to coordinate and work with the city as well.
Yeah, and in many instances, we've already obtained all of these, but we're now going back and amending all of them. I think everything except the water right, we need to amend.
So this is just super helpful to have this with graphics and all of you so that we can all kind of get on the same page, at least within the studio team, because, you know, in a couple of months, it'll be a year since we entered into our 1 month excavation of a certain, I think it was 180 feet of LA River, 360-foot pipes. Is that right?
Yeah, about 120 feet. Yeah.
And then we had to get out of the river for the rainy season and regroup and reassess the project. And we reassessed the project and decided that it was worth going through another pass at Army Corps to change a couple of things. One was the material itself of the pipes that we were putting in the river, because once we actually took some of the floodplain out of the river and realized that it was a living thing, we weren't satisfied with putting a material in the ground that would not support the life web, but would eventually deteriorate and add things that aren't in support of the life web, especially when there's the historical vitrified clay manufacturer for the whole Army Corps. Many Army Corps projects use right in Sacramento, Gladding McBean. So we wanted to go ahead and reapply, thinking that that would be also a good opportunity to acknowledge that having decorative treatment on the lid would facilitate people's understanding that there's something unusual happening. Like losing the dam and losing the backup that created the head to move the wheel means that when the concrete lid was poured over the excavation, you can't see it adequately. So we felt that reapplying to the Army Corps was worth doing. So now we're back in this project, and a couple of things have changed, but I thought maybe, I don't know if we have it to load for you, but would like to show you the proposal that we've submitted to Army Corps. Do we have it, Bees? Or Anessa? Do we have the video maybe?
I'm working on that. I'm just pulling it. Unless Bees, you've got it quicker than me. I'm pulling up the video.
Dave might have it too.
Go ahead and I'll throw it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you got it, Nessa. Thanks.
Okay, so basically, we're asking to pigment the lid the same color as the clay pipe so that the lid will look like a terracotta lid, and to use language itself to write large letters on the lid that talk about what the project is. And we made a little video to present. Now, mind you, one of the problems that we now face is there's a historic society that's protecting the look of the LA River so that it looks just like concrete. So now we didn't know that the LA River has its own historic preservation society. So this video is hopeful. Concrete, a clay color to match the vitrified clay beneath the lid. Artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. So that's what our current application has gone in order to change basically the material from one thing to another, and the other is an earth-based, locally sourced clay infrastructure making business, and we're hoping to be able to work with them on many of the pipes in the whole, project, not just the ones in the LA River. So it would be a connecting thread for the water. And also to think of the lid as an important line that's being made in the infrastructure that will help bring visibility, and to use language to acknowledge to acknowledge that language is important and the mission statement of the project, and to have our Roadrunner be there as the symbol of our water projects. So that triggers the utility, which is what we're going to start to work on tomorrow. But the Roadrunner being the symbol of the studio's water projects.
Are
So
you going to look, Lauren, to put the Roadrunner symbol in the channel as well?
yeah, at the junction of where the right angle between the flow down and our site.
Yeah, that 90-degree point.
Yeah. Good.
So, you know, we submitted this during quarantine, and I'd like, you know, for Ruth to give a little bit of reality check about what the entropy inherent in the system looks like, you know, given that we're living through COVID at the moment and an election year, and what the effect of all of this is on Army Corps, and how that's challenging, even more challenging in an already challenging situation.
Yes, it is. The Corps of Engineers, as everybody else did, about mid-March, started working from home. I think it was on the 17th, and they all came in to work one day, and about 2 o'clock they were told, grab whatever you need and be out of here within 2 hours. You'll be working at home for the next few weeks. And of course, at that time, we all thought it would only be for a couple of weeks or so. And then they're still working at home. The only ones that go into the office on a regular basis are the reservoir regulation folks, because they have dam tender responsibilities for controlling gates that are controllable on some of the dams. And then it's the IT folks to keep everybody else's computers going. And about a quarter of the folks were actually able to get on internet at the beginning, because of the system that the Department of Defense has was only meant for when you go on travel for official duty. So it's only meant for a few people to be on it at any one time. So they had to rewire their system and upgrade all of the lines to allow for all of the Corps of Engineers 30,000 people to be on at once working from home. So there have been a lot of slowdowns in that regard. Most of them I have cell numbers for, or I can catch them one way or the other, you know, between emails and calls. And then they tend to have a better excuse to ignore us now than they've ever had before, which is difficult because not all of them are issued cell phones. Like the structural engineer that we work with, for instance, he doesn't have a government issued cell phone. He won't give anybody his personal cell phone, and he's working at home. So I literally call his home number, his home landline. And I get one of the kids or his wife, and, oh, hi, is Robert there? You know, and know he's out for a run, or, you know, so it is more difficult, but I think we will plug along with that. The biggest thing that's happened just here in the last week or two is that LA District is out of the federally funded program that allows them to work on 408 projects and do reviews and have meetings and calls. So they are flat out of money. They stopped everything wherever it was at on that day that they ran out of money. And then they've taken about a week or so. We're here just yesterday. We got the comment saying that they're not doing anything on any of the 408s that have been submitted until they get further money from Congress. The only way and their fiscal year starts the 1st of October. And so the only way that they'll be able to continue like we had them doing before was for Congress to give them money to fund those projects that come in, and they'll pick up ours in the order that it's sitting on their stack on the desk. So eventually they'll get to us. I did express concern to Rafi Talukder, who's the head of the 408 program, that we really need to have all of our approvals, including the 408 and 404, by April of next year. And he said, well, that's going to be tight if they don't get money right away in October. So the only way to get around that is to be able to fund the Corps for their staff time to review and talk to us and talk back and forth with one another so that we can get the permits. And to do that, of course, involves an agreement. LA County has such an agreement, but theirs is only for their county-specific projects. LA City has an agreement that's still open. And I emailed Michael yesterday that they've got some funding still left over, but that one can be modified to add projects. It can be modified to add more money. It's my rough guess that it'll probably be around $50,000 in order to get all of the reviews and approvals completed by all the different disciplines at the Corps, so that you have your 408 and 404. With that said, Michael's taken on the task when Anissa and Michael and I had conversations back and forth the last few days to try to engage the city at the Bureau of Engineering at a high level so that maybe there could be some push for being able to fund them to fund the Corps to do the review and get the permits issued. So Michael, do you want to speak any more on that?
Yeah, I sent Deborah Weintraub an email, I guess the day before yesterday, pointing out the issue with the Corps and explaining that what we would like to do is become part of the city's 214 list of projects, that we would deposit funds with the city to pay for the Corps review. So that's a way to fund the Corps without doing it directly, which I understand we can't do. I called her this morning. She was actually not answering her phone. The voicemail didn't even come, but I'll keep on her. I can't readily think of a reason why the city would not agree to that. I mean, it doesn't compromise any of the city's projects.
Right. And
can you explain what a 214 list of projects refers to?
yes, the 214 is just a section out of one of the Water Resources Development Acts, so a congressional act for the Corps of Engineers to do business. And it's been in place since 1986 to fund the Corps for 404 regulatory review. And they've been very successful in that. And then in about 5 years ago or so, it was modified to allow Section 408 reviews to also take money under the 214 agreements. And they're a pretty simple memorandum of agreement between a public agency and the Corps. Private entities like yourself cannot sign a 214 agreement with the Corps. Congress actually passed legislation to allow that, but the Corps attorneys in Washington can't figure out how do you keep drug dealers from funding the Corps to do things. And I said, well, if it's for the public good, why not? Who cares where the money comes from? But, they're not listening to me. So anyway, they don't allow anybody except a public entity to do that. So LA Metro, I know, has an agreement because I helped them to get theirs through. That's another possibility, but I suspect it may be harder to get projects added onto their list than it would be the city. But the list of projects is just the Appendix A that's attached to the legal agreement, and it says, here are the projects, and here's the amount of money that we expect to provide to you when we're ready to initiate these projects. You can change the priority at any time, but these initial agreements are all sent out to the public agencies and to the public for 30 days for comment. Is there any reason that anybody sees for the Corps not to accept funds from these entities? And so if somebody objects, then it's harder to get your 214 agreement. But if there's already one in place, like the city, you can add to that. Some of the earlier ones had an expiration date and a finite dollar amount that you couldn't exceed without a new agreement. So if the city agrees, they send a letter to the Corps and ask for your project to be added at approximately, 50,000. And then the Corps will review it and they will give you their estimate of what they think it's going to take them. They won't give you those estimates before. And then it'll take them, after everybody's agreed to it, all the attorneys sign and you fund them, then the Corps gives you the number that you're funding. You fund the city and it goes to the Corps. And the Corps needs a couple of more weeks to turn it into a finite charging code for their timesheets. And so only people that work on your projects can charge against it. And if there's money left over at the end, they do return it to you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to, give people like a bit of a reality check, about what making an alteration to, like, if I was happy with no visual sign on the lid, and if I was happy using the original pipes, we would be in construction right now, most likely. Or would there, right now in this summer, be other issues we would have come up against?
No, we would have gone out and done nesting bird surveys because we're still in the Migratory Bird Treaty Act period, of nesting birds. We would have had to have done a new bat survey like we did last year before you constructed, but you'll have to do that every year before you go into construction.
Right.
And otherwise, no, you could have been going full steam ahead.
So I just
blazing.
yeah, I just wanted to explain that to the whole team because, it causes me pause to think about, the decision that I made to prioritize the health and well-being of the floodplain above all else in the project. And it brings into our conversation tomorrow with utility an understanding of the sacrifices that we're beginning the conversation of utility by making, right? The other thing is that by having had the experience of being in the river last year, we also realized through the cultural monitors, we also realized the beginnings of a conversation with the Gabrielino tribe, which has turned out to be way more complicated than it appeared at that moment. And it allows us a little bit more time to do the outreach to other tribes that we haven't done yet, because the original outreach for the 408 was mostly through city agencies and local nonprofits that we were at that time aware of. And it's only since being in the river that we started to realize how many stakeholders there are invisible in the permitting process that we'd like to take time to do the outreach with. And we've talked to Ruth about that because she's very much on the same page. That it's a good idea to do as much outreach as possible. And Anessa also has the whole team has that. And I think the studio in general is of that state of mind, is that we're building a new way of acknowledging the stewardship of the life web, even ways that don't exclude the 408, but extend the 408 to, to new degrees. Does anybody on the team, Ruth or Anessa or Bees or Cully or Lou or Jaime, want to weigh in on that experience last year and the conversations about outreach we've been having?
Well, I'll just say that on the course level, the outreach that they do to the tribes is they will request from the state Parks and Recreation Department, basically, is where it's housed. But it's a list of the Native American Heritage Commission sends to the Corps upon their request. The Corps sends a map and a brief project description of what each project is about, sends it to the state, and the state sends back a list of tribal entities who have expressed heritage or ancestral ties to an area. And so it's that list and that you have, I think, and they were all Gabrielino related, different segments, different tribes, like Quiche Nation is the primary one we've consulted with, because when the Corps sends out their letter to all the tribes, they send the same letter, the same cultural resources report that was done by Applied Earthworks. And every tribe that sent that letter has an opportunity to consult. The Corps says, would you like to consult? And they have 60 days basically to reply that they want to consult or not. And many of them, most of them, did not address or request a need to consult. Only Quiche did in the end. So that's the one that I think there was one other tribe, and then they said, well, we just want to know what you're doing. And so everything's sent to all of those tribes, regardless of whether they consulted or not in the end. Like the environmental assessment was sent to all of those, and as well as the public, and put on the Corps' website. But that's how the Corps does that process.
And
Yeah.
I would imagine that these are the federally recognized tribes, right? That would actually get this kind of information sent to them.
Actually, it used to be pretty strictly just the federally recognized tribes, and then they took a broader view and said, we'll do whatever the state sends us. And as you may know, the Quiche Nation, in fact, has been battling to get their tribe federally recognized. I guess they were at one point, and then they weren't. And so they're in a battle now to be federally recognized, but the Corps was given them as part of the list from the NAHC, so they sent letters and have consulted. And they were out there during the monitoring. That's primarily what they wanted. They wanted to have a say and to look at what you're doing and making sure that if anything is found, that it's treated respectfully, especially human remains. And so, and that's up to the coroner to decide what happens in the if you were to find human remains on the project. not the core. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Ruth. I can just add that some of the conversations that we've been having as a Bending the River team with Lauren are just thinking about, especially for me coming from architecture and planning fields, there's a way that these bureaucratic systems work that the path of least resistance is to just like put out the call for the community, for community feedback, and then move forward and say, these are the people who responded, that's it. And I think that the studio and Lauren and we as a team like take an extra responsibility, which is what I'm really excited about for us to do our own outreach as well, of saying it's not enough to just say, well, the Keach Nation are the only ones who responded. It's actually saying, well, maybe, and Ruth, it was really helpful to hear you explain how the Corps does their outreach. But I imagine if I'm getting a letter from the Army Corps of Engineers, I would probably be a little confused or unclear, even if it just includes a project description. So I think we all have that experience as citizens, that some of these things can be confusing to deal with without some further context. So I'm really excited to take this on. It's a new opportunity basically to be better neighbors.
Yes, and certainly in their own projects, they have a much greater outreach, like the ecosystem restoration project for the LA River with all the nodes and all the gazillion workshops and public meetings and such, and outreaches to a number of the NGOs. So I totally agree with that. But, in the regulatory world that they live in on those permits, they don't do that. They just send the letters, and if you respond, you respond, and if you don't, you don't. And so,
and basically it's
that's it.
And it's basically just a checklist of all of the agencies that need to have an eye to it, to look through their lens so that that box can be checked and they can move forward. So the Army Corps is looking primarily just for it to be maintained as a flood control system. The environmental folks are looking at the birds and making sure that the environmental impacts are being upheld for like bird nesting. And then the cultural ones, they're looking at, primarily Matt was in there looking to see, if there's going to be any remains, but everybody has their little perspective on the project. But from an Army Corps of Engineer, they're just looking to check the box that they sent it out and that they had completed their outreach to these agencies. And if they don't respond, then we just move forward and we keep checking the boxes so that everything is in compliance with the overall permit requirements.
That's correct. On the permitting, it's exactly correct.
I think it's interesting, though, that because of the work that Lauren does and her ongoing work with the Native communities, that there's an opportunity for a much bigger dialogue. So I'm happy to see that that's continuing.
Well, and also we've learned so much along the way. I mean, it's been 8 years since we applied for our first 408 in 2012. And since that time, the next year, the studio undertook a 240-mile survey of all of the LA aqueduct infrastructure with 100 mules. Michael Gagan and Associates working with the studio team, working with mule packers to actually do a kind of parade through every town and city that the LA aqueduct moves through. But it also gave us a real primer into outreach as a performative action. A couple years after that, in 2016, we hosted water talks with the indigenous people in the Owens Valley to talk about my responsibility to water through the water right number 21432, and that my 2134, whatever, 21432, I think. Yeah, 3, 4. Thanks, Helen. 2, she knows, she composed for it. 21342. Um, um, the research that went into understanding what that water right means across the United States took the studio to Detroit to try and understand the concept of a water right in relationship to like the water shutoffs going on in Detroit, where people were denied access to water because of the management situation there. And then, you know, to think about the floodplain since last year as a living system, which was an unintended consequence of construction that I would have never, I always thought of the LA River kind of being the, like, the lid is actually the top of the LA River. And I always thought of that as the bottom. And it was only through doing that excavation that I started to realize that there's this vast network of living things under the lid, just waiting for light to an atmosphere to activate it with. So, you know, I just wanted the whole studio to understand the journey via the 408, because I'm not sure that it takes so long that it's always clear that it could very well be 10 years until we get the 408. You know, if we don't get it next year, we'll just keep waiting. We will get it, I believe, at some point. But just in terms of explaining to you guys that something like as hidden as two numbers that are integers of each other, 4 and an 8, 408, like that can take 10 years and a huge amount of professional skill to just be able to get into the river, that if we did it as fast as possible, we could probably do the job that the permit allows us to do in 6 weeks or something. So that's the reality that's underneath this project, and why it's important for me that we all know what the 408 is and what a big part of the practice it is to be waiting for it, waiting for Godot almost. So thank you all for this incredible salon, and I really hope that this is helping everybody to understand bending the river back into the city, and also the beginning of our conversation tomorrow morning with the utility group about what we've been up to and what this is a part of. And just thank you so much to our long-term consultants of Michael Gagan and Mark Hanna and you know, Ruth, it's been so invaluable having you and Anessa and on the team, and our incredible bees joining to help us, her first day of work being in the river itself. So that was such a, like, talk about throwing someone into the deep end. And Kelly, you know, we really have a really strong team, but I think we also, as this project enriches, there's many of you who've been on the Mule March, who did the survey with me of the LA River, and who have sat in on city organized or nonprofit organized outreach. But I think we now, in this time that we have, will be way more conscious about our internal conversation in relationship to the 408, and also the outreach that we need to do that we have not done yet. And making sure that we talk with the tribes, talk with other stakeholders, and allow them the space to confer with us about the project. I haven't been watching the chat bar because this has been exercising my brain to have this conversation. So thank you for that opportunity. And also thank you, Lou, for all of your years of service in this really incredibly trying time. And we're so glad that you are, you've been part of our team and are here with us today. I remember Lou last summer was already like ready to move on to new adventures. And when we finally got the 408, I was like, Lou, there's no way I can do this without you. Please stay through this initial construction in the river. But you know, as you can see, it may never happen, ladies and gentlemen. So it's important to get reality about all of this, which is, you know, this is how I've chosen to function at the intersection of my trusteehood and my art practice. Like I've tried to do what I can uniquely do in holding the space to think that another infrastructure is possible. One that prioritizes the possibility of the wastewater being cleansed and the reenchantment of the floodplain in the arid lands being a possibility for us. And what seemed like a super easy no-brainer has turned into a 10-year, at the earliest, long-term action. And I had no idea, like most of us who are creative, what this was going, what kind of story was unfolding. But certainly the 408 is a big part of it. And I thought to use these internal sort of salons to share that story up to now. So does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question or offer any anything up for the?
Just add that that we've got more to share, and this is obviously the river construction is a big one, and this process. But we've got a lot more interesting parts of this project to share.
Definitely. I also wanted to, I'm going to save the chat bar when I leave the meeting, but I would encourage anyone who didn't follow to read, because a lot of folks in the studio wrote really, really, I'm like, this should be like its own newsletter. We put in a lot of thought and really awesome writing. Thank you.
Lauren, you know that there was a water wheel a couple of 100 yards north of your site, built in 1854. And from the time the city council approved funding that water wheel to the time it started operating was a total of 3 months. So 3 months, 10 years.
Thanks, Michael.
It's been a really interesting experience, because I think with the process, it is completely contingent upon reaching a certain benchmark for the next step to be revealed. Every single time we thought we were going to get the 408, something else revealed itself, whether it was, you know, lack of funding at the Army Corps, whether it was the maintenance department at the Army Corps, which is one of the 9 divisions that had to weigh in on this permit, saying, you know what, it's an attractive nuisance, and we need to be able to bring our vehicles, you know, up and down the river whenever we choose. And at that point, we could have very easily seen the end of that project. If it wasn't for Lauren and Jaime and, you know, going back to the drawing board, working with Mark to figure out this diversion of upstream 1,200 feet, there would be no project right now, because there was no way foreseeably that we could have ever built a dam that the Army Corps would have allowed, even though the city really wanted to see the first dam in the river for all of its reasons. So each time we were so close to receiving the permit, something else revealed itself. And then all of a sudden, great, you're diverting water from an upstream channel. And then all of a sudden you're altering the envelope of the Army Corps, and the State Historic Preservation Office steps in, and it's a whole nother series of work. So I think one of the most enriching things for me is that it wasn't just sitting in one boring meeting after another. Every meeting revealed some other aspect that required a lot of thought, a lot of energy, and going back to the drawing board and sitting with Lauren and figuring out ways in which we could address each one every time to keep this thing running. You know, so it wasn't just that it was in a system for 8 years that had to have its due process. The due process was completely contingent upon roadblocks that we ran into time and time again. So it's been a really, really fascinating journey just within the river channel. And like, you know, Anissa said and Lauren said, there's so many more other aspects to the project. But, you know, the Bending the River team put a lot of time, energy, and thought and to, you know, get to this point. So I'm just, you know, I'm hopeful and optimistic that, you know, even with the potential COVID slow ups, that we're going to reach the finish line and get the clay pipe embedded in the river.
And I wanted to second that, Lou. You know, the Corps, this running out of money is not the first time that that's happened. We had it happen, I think, 3 times during the last year of the permitting before we finally were able to have meetings and get on this different track that we're on. And then I do want to say that you, Lauren, and your entire team has been so impressive with the incredible creativity that you bring to light in each of the scenarios. And I marvel at Mark and his team for being able to translate all of that into real engineering drawings that the Corps could look at and comment on and work back and forth so effectively, because it wasn't easy. You know, the Corps has their own set of standards that aren't Caltrans standards, for instance, or anybody else's. So his team really had to do a lot of work on making sure it all met Corps standards for us to be able to get it through. So that made my job much easier.
And one of the things we didn't mention is, and Lauren talks about it in working with all of her projects, is political time, and how that the leaders in the Army Corps of, you know, one year are not there the next, or that they cycle out, or that even you know, that our current president, being head of the Army Corps of Engineers, could divert funds to you know, a border wall. That could affect the Army Corps funding. It's like as all of this is going on, the understanding that the complex infrastructure artwork is contingent upon political time, and all of the representatives that cycle in and out during that period is pretty significant.
Very well said. Yeah. And, you know, my job on writing permits and doing environmental documents and trying to help facilitate through is pretty second nature for me, because I've done it forever. But I just commend all of you for the efforts that you put into the creativity and then translating that into drawings and profiles and calculations for structural and all. So. And then speaking of changing of the guard, Colonel Barta is out. He's basically packing up this week, and he will be out and gone on the 14th.
Wow.
Next week. And the new colonel, who is Julie Balten, B-A-L-T-E-N, is here. Had a cocktail hour with them and 20 other people yesterday virtually. So at least we got to see who she is, and with the outgoing and incoming person. And so he will be taking a hiatus and moving to Dallas, Fort Worth, and that's near his family, and raising his 2 boys. And then she will be coming in with her 6-year-old son.
Is this our fourth or fifth colonel, Mark?
Gosh, am I on mute
It's at
here?
least the
No,
fourth
it's,
colonel.
yeah, I mean, it was Magnuson and then Toy.
Yeah.
And then Colleton.
Then that lady.
Yeah, Kim Colleton.
Kim
Kim.
Colleton, right?
Yeah, and then you had, was there one between her and Martha?
Gibb. When did,
Yeah, Kirk Gibbs, and then Aaron Barta. So 5th, she'll be your 6th one.
Yeah.
all right.
Woo!
Are they colonels because the Army Corps adheres to the rank and file system of the military?
Yes, yes. And not all districts are commanded by colonels, but LA is such a large, robust district with 49 representatives in the House of Representatives and all. So that's staffed by a colonel, where Sacramento is also. Albuquerque and San Francisco are both run by a lieutenant colonel. So,
Got
but in the Corps of Engineers, like when I was there, there were about 1,000, little over 1,000 people in the LA district, and about 6 or 7 of those were military personnel. The colonel, and then he had a lieutenant colonel military deputy, because they do construction for military installations and bases. So, good question. So we will want Lauren to meet the new colonel, but it'll probably be a few months, because she'll have to meet all the representatives first, and then go back to Washington for a few weeks for what we all call charm school. She's never had a civilian post before. She's always been military, kind of high level logistics and strategic planning and stuff that none of us get to know about. So this will be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there will be more to discuss for sure, but I just in this moment where we're kind of regrouping and having time to go deeper, I just thought there's one thing about things taking time, which is that we're all assimilating a lot of new knowledge along the way, and we're living through a radically changing moment in our lives. We're living through a historical moment. So it's allowing us an aperture to understand infrastructure management through this time too, and really highlighting how important it is for us as private citizens who care about our community to strategize around engaging with infrastructure and the management of our water supply in the arid lands. So lots of work to be done, lots of hard, careful work, and it's been I've always felt like this project in particular utilizes every tiny bit of my abilities, from creative to patience to communication to humility to but mostly about staying teachable and as flexible as possible to navigate all the things that you need to navigate to get something that's potentially going to be invisible That's the irony, you know, it's like the idea that all of this happens after 10 years and that's all underground and then just connects to underground pipes. Um, it's like the monument of the invisible in support of the web is what it's all kind of been about, but it's really super critical for me that the studio team knows what goes into this.
Well put.
What's the saying, Mark? The engineer's best work nobody ever sees.
It's been an amazing journey to work with you, Lauren, and your team. It's unbelievable. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody, it's probably time for me to stop pretending I can use my brain anymore. And just please unmute yourselves on your way out, and thank you to our guests for being with us. And just know we're all very thankful and that we have your professional support in this endeavor.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Ruth,
Thank you,
and
Lauren.
Thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you, Lauren, Michael.
Making it
Thank
down.
you, everyone.